Chapter 1. A long drive. Craig was driving on the motorway. It was Friday afternoon in August, and the road was full of cars. Everyone was going somewhere for the weekend. Some people were going on holiday, some were visiting family, and others just wanted to get out of the city. Craig had been driving for 40 minutes, but he was still not far from home. The cars were moving very slowly. They would move forward a little, then stop again. Stop and go. Stop and go. It was frustrating. He tapped his fingers on the steering wheel. He wanted to reach the beach as soon as possible. He had been looking forward to this trip all week. He looked at the hard shoulder, the empty lane on the side of the road. It was so tempting to drive there and pass all the cars. If he was stopped by another officer, he could just show his police badge. Maybe they would let him go. But Craig was not that kind of policeman. He always followed the rules, even when nobody was watching. Some of his colleagues didn't care. They used their position to make things easy for themselves. They parked in the wrong places, drove too fast, or used their badge to get out of trouble. Craig was different. He believed in doing the right thing, even if it was difficult. The sun was hot, and his t-shirt stuck to his back. He could feel sweat on his forehead. The air inside the car was warm, even though he had the air conditioner on. It wasn't helping much. He opened the window, but the air outside was hot too. He picked up the bottle of water from the cup holder. It wasn't cold anymore, but at least it was something to drink. He took a sip and felt a little better. Then he wiped his forehead with his arm and looked at the sweat on his skin. Gross, he muttered to himself. After what felt like hours, the traffic finally started to move faster. Craig pressed his foot on the accelerator and kept his speed steady at 70 miles per hour. Now he was making good time. He was getting closer to the coast. He turned off the motorway and drove through the countryside. The road passed over Exmoor, a beautiful but empty place. The land was dry and brown from the summer heat. There were no houses, no shops, just hills, trees, and fields, with a few sheep and cows. Away from the busy roads, Craig started to relax. He took a deep breath and smiled. He had a whole week off from work. No stress, no pressure, just the beach, the sea, and his surfboard. That was all he needed. A simple holiday plan. Craig and his friends had rented a small beach hut at Everdeen. There were 8 of them, all young policemen who loved the sea. They spent their free time surfing, climbing rocks, walking along the cliffs, and kayaking in the water. It was cheaper than going on a big holiday. They didn't need expensive hotels or flights. The hut was just a 3-hour drive from home. Whenever they had free time, they came down to enjoy the beach. This time, Craig was the only one going. His friends had other plans. Some were visiting their families, others had work, and a few just wanted to stay home. Craig didn't mind being alone. In fact, after the stressful weeks he had at work, he wanted peace and quiet. He needed time to think. Time to clear his mind. The last supermarket before Everdeen was just ahead. Craig decided to stop and buy some food. He didn't want to leave the beach once he got there. He walked into the store and grabbed a basket. He picked up a hot chicken, some bread rolls, a bag of salad, some fruit, a packet of biscuits, and a few beers. He also bought a big bottle of water. That was enough for the weekend. By the time he reached Everdeen, it would be 6 o'clock. He could already imagine it. He would unlock the beach hut, sit on the wooden steps, open a cold beer, and watch the sun go down over the sea. The thought made him smile. As he left the supermarket, he turned up the radio in his car. A song he liked was playing. He grinned and let out a small cheer. "Let the weekend begin," he said, driving towards the beach. Chapter 2. The ice cream girl, Jenna, wiped the counter of her ice cream kiosk again. It was already clean, but she liked everything to look perfect. The sun was shining, and the small radio behind her was playing music. She checked the cones, making sure they were ready for the next customer. Then she looked at the tubs of ice cream. They were full of different colors: chocolate, strawberry, and vanilla. But there were also special flavors like maple and walnut, rhubarb and ginger, and peanut butter. The most popular flavor for kids was bubble gum. It was bright blue and very sweet. Jenna had worked at Dream Ices all summer. The small kiosk was at the top of the row of shops leading down to the harbor. Stockholm, the town where she lived, had once been a busy holiday place. A long time ago, many tourists came here to enjoy the beach, but things had changed. Now, fewer people visited. Many hotels had closed. Some restaurants had shut down too. When a place closed, the windows were covered with boards, then people sprayed graffiti on them. The town started to look old and forgotten. The fishing boats still came in and out of the harbor, but the streets were quieter. By day, only a few visitors walked along the seafront. By night, groups of bored teenagers sat on the beach, drinking cheap beer. The coastline was beautiful: huge cliffs, crashing waves, golden sand. But the town itself was not as lively as before. Still, Dream Ices was doing okay. Even when people didn't have much money, they still bought ice cream. Jenna spent most afternoons scooping ice cream into cones. Some days, she was very busy. Even though she worked hard, she had started to notice something strange. Some of the ice cream tubs were nearly empty, but nobody was refilling them. Usually, as soon as a flavor got low, a new tub would be put in the freezer. But now, they were running out of rum and raisin, mint chocolate chip, and Devon clotted cream fudge. Jenna asked her boss, Terry, about it. "We're running low," she said. "Are we getting more stock?" Terry just nodded and said, "I'll sort it out." But he didn't seem to care. That made Jenna feel uneasy. Something didn't feel right. Bad news. Jenna was still thinking about it when Terry came to speak to her that Friday afternoon. "I've got bad news," he said. "I didn't want this to happen, but times are hard. I have to let you go." Jenna's eyes widened in shock. "You're firing me?" she asked. "I can't afford to keep you," Terry said, looking uncomfortable. "I'll have to run the kiosk myself." Jenna wasn't sure how Terry was going to manage that. He spent most of his time drinking beer in the pub or gambling at the betting shop. Maybe that was why the business was struggling. "But things are picking up," she said. "We've been busy today. And the weather is great this weekend, nearly 30 degrees. Terry shook his head. "Even if we doubled our sales, I still can't afford to pay you." "But we did well this summer," Jenna insisted. Some days I didn't stop scooping ice cream. We must have made enough money. Not like the old days, Terry said. Before, I could make 500 pounds in a day. Now I can barely make that in a week. Rent has gone up. Stock prices are higher. Jenna didn't know what to say. Then Terry cleared his throat. There's something else. I can't pay you your wages either. Jenna's heart sank. You're kidding, she said. I don't have the money, Terry admitted. I had to pay my supplier first. There was nothing left. Jenna stared at him, but there had been enough for him to buy beer at lunchtime. She could smell it on his breath. I'll bring your money when I have it, Terry promised. If we have a good weekend. Jenna knew she would never see that money. You could have told me earlier, she said angrily. You knew you couldn't pay me, but you let me keep working. I was hoping things would get better, Terry said. I was hoping, Jenna crossed her arms. Hoping for a win on the horses? Terry shrugged, and Jenna felt her face burn with anger. Gambling is a waste of money, she snapped. If it was easy, everyone would do it. Terry didn't reply. Instead, he walked away and stood by the harbor, lighting a cigarette. A final act, Jenna felt like crying, but she refused to let Terry see her upset. She had been a good worker. She had always smiled at customers and convinced them to buy extra scoops. Locals came to Dream Ices not just for the ice cream, but because of her friendly attitude. She had even made the job fun. At first, she sang along with the radio. Then she started using an ice cream cone as a microphone and singing out loud. Customers enjoyed it. People laughed and even made song requests. They called her the Ice Cream Girl. She had liked that nickname. But now, it was over. In 2 minutes, she had lost her job, her money, and her trust in Terry. She had believed he would look after her, but he had let her down. Jenna took off her apron and folded it neatly. Then she grabbed the bottle of strawberry sauce and squeezed it over every tub of ice cream. She did the same with the chocolate sauce. Then she sprinkled an entire jar of hundreds and thousands on top. Terry came back just as she finished. His eyes widened. "What have you done?" he shouted. Jenna shrugged. "You can take it out of my wages," she said. Then she walked away without saying goodbye. A bigger problem. As Jenna walked home, her anger turned into fear. She lived in a small rented room. She shared the kitchen and bathroom with 6 other people. It wasn't a nice place, but it was all she could afford. 3 weeks ago, the house was broken into. Someone smashed the doors and took everything valuable. Jenna didn't own much, but she had kept her rent money hidden in a drawer. The burglars took that too. Her landlord wasn't kind or understanding. He didn't care that the house had bad locks. He only cared about the rent. Jenna had promised him she would pay by the end of the week. But now she had no job, no money, no way to pay him. It was Friday. She only had 2 days left. She knew what her landlord was like. If she didn't pay, he would throw her out. She had seen it happen to others before. He wouldn't care where she went. Jenna's stomach twisted with worry. She had left her mother's house a year ago to be independent. She had thought she could take care of herself, but now she wasn't so sure. She couldn't go back. She didn't want to hear her mother's sarcastic voice saying, "I told you so." No, she had to find a way. She had to get money. She just didn't know how. Chapter 3. The Beach Hut. Craig drove the last few miles along a winding country road. Tall green hedges lined the way, and the fields were full of cows and sheep. He smiled as he reached the roundabout leading down to Everdeen. Then he saw it. The sea. Every time he arrived, that first glimpse of the ocean made his heart lift. The water stretched far into the horizon, changing colors under the sky. The golden beach below was long and soft, and lined up neatly along the shore were the beach huts, small, colorful wooden cabins. Craig's beach hut was the 7th one. It was painted blue and white, though the paint was peeling. It wasn't fancy, but he and his friends loved it. He parked his car and grabbed his bags, his clothes, his wetsuit, his surfboard, and the food he had bought earlier. Before heading to the hut, he stopped at a small cafe near the beach and ordered a bag of chips. Sitting outside, he ate them one by one, enjoying the salty taste. Craig usually ate healthy food, but when he was here, he always treated himself. Finally, he made the last part of the walk barefoot. The sand was still warm from the sun, but cooler underneath. His feet sank into it as he carried his things toward the hut. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The smell of sea, wood, and salt filled the small space. The hut had bunk beds, a tiny kitchen, a soft but sagging sofa, and an old table with wobbly chairs. It wasn't much, but it felt like home. Craig put his bags down, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and stepped outside. He sat on a deck chair, stretched his legs, and took a deep breath. The fresh sea air filled his lungs. For the first time in weeks, he felt truly relaxed. For the next 7 days, there would be no work, no stress, just the waves, the sand, and the open sky. His week of peace had begun. Chapter 4. The first morning, Craig woke up early to the sound of waves. The beach was quiet, and the air was cool. He stretched in his small bunk, enjoying the peaceful moment. No stress, no work, just the sea. He sat up, rubbing his eyes. The smell of salt and wood filled the beach hut. It was old and simple, but that was what he loved about it. He checked his phone. No messages. That was good. Craig grabbed his wetsuit and surfboard, then stepped outside. The sun was rising, turning the sky orange and pink. The beach was nearly empty. It was the perfect time to surf. Jogging down to the water, he felt the cool sand under his feet. Without hesitating, he ran into the waves. The first touch was cold, but he paddled forward, cutting through the water. He waited for the perfect wave. When it came, he stood up, riding smoothly toward the shore. For a few seconds, he felt completely free. The wind, the water, the speed. It was the best feeling in the world. For an hour he surfed, catching waves and enjoying the moment. As the beach got busier, he decided to take a break. He walked back, pulling down his wetsuit and shaking the water from his hair. A different morning, in Stockholm, Jenna was also awake, but she wasn't feeling peaceful. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her mind was full of worries. No job, no money, no way to pay rent. Her landlord, the prof, would kick her out on Monday if she didn't pay. She had seen him do it to others. He wouldn't listen to excuses. Her tiny room was stuffy. The walls were cracked, and the furniture was old. She had left home a year ago, thinking she could make a better life for herself. But things had only gotten harder. She grabbed her phone. No job offers, no help. She needed money. Fast. Jenna got up and dressed in a bikini and a light summer dress. She pulled her blonde hair into a ponytail, grabbed her beach bag, and left the house. She had just enough money for the bus to Everdeen. She sat by the window looking outside as the bus drove toward the coast. She had never stolen before. But today, she had no choice. 2 different lives, 1 place. Craig walked up to the cafe near the arcade and ordered a big breakfast. He had burned a lot of energy in the water. Now he needed food. As he sat outside enjoying his meal, he heard a familiar voice. "Hey, mate." It was Rusty, an old friend from the beach. He was a photographer, always traveling. He took pictures of the sea and sold them to tourists. They shook hands and sat together. "How's life?" Rusty asked, lighting a small cigarette. Craig hesitated. Rusty was the kind of guy who never judged. "It's been rough," Craig admitted. "Work?" Craig nodded. "Yeah, I used to love being a cop. Now, I don't know." Rusty exhaled, watching the waves. "You've got time to figure it out." Craig thought about that. Maybe Rusty was right. A risky plan. Jenna stepped off the bus in Everdeen. The streets were packed with tourists. She walked past the shops, past the cafe, past the surfboard rental. She kept her head down, moving through the crowd. She needed a target. Families with small kids were best. Parents were distracted, not watching their bags. She spotted her chance at the ice cream van. A man stood in line, struggling with 2 little kids. His wallet was sticking out of his pocket. Jenna moved closer, pretending to check her phone. The man bent down to talk to one child. Now, in one smooth motion, she took the wallet and slipped it into her bag. Her heart pounded, but she didn't run. She walked calmly to the nearest bin, pulled out the cash, and dropped the wallet inside. 65 pounds. She took a deep breath. 1 more, she told herself. Just 1 more. Then she would leave. Someone is watching. Craig saw everything. At first, he had noticed Jenna because she was alone. Most girls her age were with friends, taking selfies, laughing. But she wasn't. Then he saw her near the ice cream stand. He watched as she took the wallet, and he watched as she walked away. Craig sighed and stood up. So much for a quiet weekend. Chapter 5. Caught in the act, Jenna walked back to her towel and sat down, pretending nothing had happened. Her heart was still racing, but she forced herself to stay calm. The heat of the sun burned her skin, but she barely noticed it. She had just stolen for the first time, and it had been easy. The 65 pounds in her bag felt heavier than it should. It wasn't much, but it was a start. She only needed a little more. Then she could stop. She looked around, scanning the beach. She needed one last target. Her eyes landed on a family further down the shore. The mother was rubbing sunscreen on her children's faces. The father was helping them put on their wetsuits. Jenna had seen him take out his wallet earlier. He had handed the kids money for ice creams. Then, he had put the wallet inside their cool box. It was an easy mistake. People thought their things were safe inside bags or boxes. But she knew better. She waited. The family grabbed their towels and walked toward the water. She gave them a minute, making sure they wouldn't turn back. Then she stood up and strolled toward their spot. She moved carefully, stepping between towels and beach chairs, acting as if she was just looking for a better place to sit. When she reached the family's area, she casually sat down on their rug, opened the cool box, and reached inside. She grabbed the wallet, along with a sandwich and a chocolate bar. Her stomach rumbled. She hadn't eaten since yesterday afternoon. She unwrapped the sandwich and took a bite as she walked away, stuffing the wallet into her bag. Her hands were shaking. She kept walking, heading toward the bins where she had thrown the last wallet. She didn't know that someone was watching her. A police officer on holiday, Craig was sitting in front of his beach hut, binoculars in hand. At first, he wasn't sure what he had seen. The girl with the ponytail had caught his eye earlier. She was alone, which was unusual. Now, he had just watched her walk up to the family's spot, take something from the cool box, and walk away. A few minutes earlier, he had seen her near the ice cream stand. He had seen the way she moved. Too careful, too smooth. Craig had been a policeman long enough to recognize when someone was up to something. He sighed and put down his binoculars. He hadn't come here to work, but he couldn't ignore what he had seen. Some people might say it was just a few stolen wallets. Nothing serious. But he knew better. Small crimes led to bigger ones. And if nobody stopped her, she would keep doing it. Craig stood up and started walking toward her. A sudden confrontation. Jenna was heading toward the bins when she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey," a voice said. She froze. She turned around slowly. A man stood in front of her, tall, tanned, wearing red surf shorts. His dark hair was still damp from the sea. She recognized him immediately. It was the guy from the cafe, the one she had bumped into when she spilled her tea. He looked straight at her, his silver gray eyes calm but serious. Jenna forced a smile. "Oh, it's you," she said lightly. "Did I spill tea on you again?" He didn't smile back. "I saw what you did," he said simply. Jenna's heart pounded. "What do you mean?" Craig crossed his arms. "The wallet, the cool box." Jenna kept her face blank. "I don't know what you're talking about." Craig sighed. "Look, I'm not here to make a scene, but I know what I saw." Jenna swallowed. She could run, but where? He looked fit. He could probably catch her. She shrugged. "I think you're mistaken." Craig pulled something out of his pocket and held it up. A police badge. Jenna's stomach dropped. A choice to make. For the first time in her life, Jenna didn't know what to say. She had been caught, not by just anyone, but by a cop. She stared at the badge, then at him. He wasn't shouting. He wasn't grabbing her. He wasn't even threatening her. Instead, he simply asked, "Why?" Jenna looked away. "It doesn't matter." "It does," Craig said. She folded her arms. "Are you going to arrest me?" Craig studied her. He could see the guilt in her face, the hesitation in her voice. He wasn't sure why, but he didn't want to drag her to the station. He just wanted to understand. "No," he said finally. "Not if you give the money back." Jenna blinked. "What?" "You heard me," Craig said. "Give the money back, and we forget this happened." Jenna hesitated. If she returned the money, she would have nothing. But if she refused, he might arrest her. Her hands clenched into fists. This wasn't fair, but neither was stealing. With a heavy sigh, she reached into her bag, pulled out the money, and handed it over. Craig took it and nodded. "Come with me," he said. Jenna frowned. "Where?" Craig gestured toward the beach huts. "Let's talk." Jenna hesitated. She could run, but something in his voice told her it wouldn't help. She sighed and followed him up the beach. Chapter 6. A serious talk. Jenna followed Craig up the beach toward his hut. She wasn't sure why she was listening to him, but something about the way he spoke made her feel like she had no other choice. Craig pushed open the faded blue door and stepped inside. Jenna hesitated, then followed. The inside of the hut was small and simple. Wooden bunks, a tiny kitchen, and an old sofa. A few surfboards leaned against the wall. It smelled of salt and sun-warmed wood. Craig poured 2 glasses of water and handed one to her. Jenna took it, but didn't drink. "So," he said, leaning against the table. "Want to tell me why you're stealing?" Jenna crossed her arms. "I don't have to tell you anything." Craig shrugged. "No, you don't. But I'd like to hear your side before I decide what to do." Jenna sighed. She knew he had the power to turn her in. She had no good excuses, but maybe if he understood, he would let her go. "I lost my job yesterday," she said finally. Craig raised an eyebrow. "Where did you work?" "The ice cream kiosk," she said. "Dream Ices." Craig nodded. "And your boss fired you?" Jenna clenched her jaw. "Yeah, and he didn't pay me either. 2 weeks' wages, gone." Craig exhaled through his nose. He could guess what kind of boss she had worked for. He had seen it before, people taking advantage of workers, especially young ones. "So you decided to steal?" he asked. Jenna looked away. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Craig said. She scoffed. "Easy for you to say. You have a job, a place to live." Craig was quiet for a moment. "What about your family?" Jenna let out a short laugh. "You think I can go home? My mom doesn't care what happens to me. I'd rather live on the street than crawl back there." Craig studied her. She wasn't just some careless thief. She was desperate. But that didn't make stealing right. "What now?" Jenna sighed and leaned back against the wall. "So, what now? Are you going to arrest me?" Craig thought for a moment. "No," he said. "But you can't keep doing this." Jenna rolled her eyes. "Great advice. Really helpful." Craig ignored her sarcasm. "What if I help you find a job?" Jenna frowned. "Why would you do that?" "Because you don't belong in a police station," he said. "You need a fresh start, not a criminal record." Jenna looked at him carefully. She had spent her whole life expecting the worst from people. But this guy, this policeman, was different. She wasn't sure why, but for the first time in a long time, she felt like someone actually cared. She took a deep breath. "Okay," she said. "I'll try." Craig nodded. "Good." Maybe, just maybe, this was the beginning of something better. Chapter 7. A New Deal. Jenna sat on the old sofa, tapping her fingers on the armrest. She still wasn't sure why she was here. She should have run when she had the chance, but something about Craig made her stay. He sat across from her, arms crossed, watching her carefully. "You need money," he said. "That's clear, but stealing isn't the answer." Jenna sighed. "Then tell me, what is?" Craig leaned forward. "You said you worked at the ice cream kiosk. You know how to deal with customers, right?" Jenna shrugged. "Yeah, I was good at it too. Not that it mattered in the end." Craig ignored her bitterness. "The cafe near the beach was looking for staff last week. I know the owner. Maybe I can put in a word for you." Jenna frowned. "You think they'd hire me?" "If you stop stealing, yeah," Craig said. Jenna chewed her lip. It wasn't a bad idea, but even if she got the job, it wouldn't solve her immediate problem. "I need money now," she said. "By Monday. My landlord is kicking me out." Craig thought for a moment, then stood up and walked to a small cupboard. He pulled out a tin and opened it. Inside were a few notes and some coins. Jenna watched as he counted out 60 pounds. He set the money on the table. "Take this. Pay your rent. Then you start fresh." Jenna's eyes widened. "Are you serious?" Craig nodded. "Consider it a loan. You pay me back when you can." Jenna stared at the money. It felt unreal. Nobody had ever helped her like this before, at least not without wanting something in return. She hesitated, then picked up the notes slowly. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll do better," Craig said. Jenna met his eyes. They were calm, steady, not judging. She nodded. "I will." For the first time in a long time, she meant it. Chapter 8. A Promise to Change. Jenna sat in Craig's beach hut, staring at the money in her hands. It felt strange, heavy. Not because of its weight, but because of what it meant. She had spent the whole day trying to steal enough money to pay her rent. And now, here was Craig, handing it to her, without tricks, without threats, without asking for anything in return. She looked up at him. "Why are you doing this?" Craig leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "Because I know where this road leads. I've seen too many people take the wrong path, thinking they had no other choice." Jenna scoffed. "You mean people like me? Thieves?" Craig shook his head. "People who think they're alone. People who stop believing things can change." Jenna looked away. That was exactly how she felt. Alone. Stuck. No way forward. No way back. She sighed. "I don't want to be a thief." "Then don't be," Craig said simply. "You have a chance to fix this. Not everyone gets that." Jenna hesitated. For years, she had been told that people only looked out for themselves. She had learned to trust no one. But now, Here was this man, a stranger, offering her a second chance. She met his eyes. They weren't filled with anger or judgment, just quiet understanding. She exhaled slowly. Okay, I'll try. Craig nodded. Good. First, you pay your rent. Then, we get you a job. Jenna bit her lip. And if I mess up? Craig studied her for a moment. Then you try again. But no more stealing. Jenna stared at him. He made it sound so simple. Like she wasn't completely lost. She tucked the money into her bag. All right, I promise. Back to reality, Jenna left the beach hut and stepped onto the sand. The sky was turning pink and orange as the sun dipped toward the horizon. The beach was quieter now. Families were packing up their towels, surfers were pulling on hoodies, and couples were walking hand in hand. She walked slowly toward the bus stop, her mind still spinning. Everything felt different. She wasn't proud of what she had done today, but she wasn't leaving Everdeen the same person she had been when she arrived. For the first time in a long time, she had hope. She would pay her rent. She would find a job. She would try to build something better for herself. She thought about Craig. He had no reason to help her, but he had. Maybe not everyone was out for themselves. Maybe, just maybe, she had finally met someone she could trust. As the bus arrived, Jenna took one last look at the beach. Then she stepped inside, ready to start again. A new beginning. The bus ride back to Talcombe felt different than usual. Normally, Jenna sat in the back, watching the run-down buildings pass by, feeling trapped in her life. But tonight, there was something new. A small flicker of hope. She pressed her forehead against the window, watching the countryside roll by. She thought about what Craig had said. Maybe life didn't have to be like this. Maybe she had more choices than she thought. She pulled the money from her bag and counted it again. 60 pounds. Enough to stop the prof from throwing her out. For the first time all day, she felt like she could breathe. She leaned back in her seat and closed her eyes. Tomorrow she would find a job. Tomorrow she would start over. Tomorrow she would prove to herself and to Craig that she wasn't just another lost cause. For now, though, she just wanted to sleep. The bus rocked gently as it moved down the road. The voices of tired travelers murmured around her. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. And for the first time in a long time, Jenna let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better.